The cat first noticed the mouse on a late summer afternoon. The little creature was darting along the fence, whiskers twitching, pausing now and then as if listening to music no one else could hear. Most cats would have pounced without a second thought. But this cat, sleek, clever-eyed, and as smooth in her words as in her movements, had other ideas. "Mouse," she called softly, her voice almost purring with warmth. "Why do we scurry about like enemies? The world is wide, and the winter will be cold. Perhaps it's time for a little cooperation." The mouse hesitated, paws gripping the wood. "You and me, as friends." She tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "I've heard stories about your kind. Not all of them end well." The cat smiled, not the sharp smile of hunger, but something practiced, almost charming. "Stories are for those who can't write their own. I'm offering something better than suspicion, a partnership. We keep a home together, we share the work, and we both survive the winter." The mouse's nose twitched. The offer was tempting. She was quick and resourceful, but the idea of a warm corner and a shared food supply made her heart beat faster. "And no catching, no claws." "On my honor," the cat said smoothly, pressing a paw to her chest. "We'll be equals, friends. I'd even call you my sister, if you'd like." Something in the cat's tone made the mouse's wariness loosen. "All right," she said slowly. "We'll share a home, but we'll need to store food. Lots of it." "Agreed," said the cat at once. "And I know the perfect treasure to keep us through the frost. A pot of fine, rich fat." Within the week, they had scraped together enough to fill a clay pot with the pale, glistening fat. But there was a problem: where to hide it. The mouse suggested the attic, the cupboard, even under the floorboards, but the cat shook her head at each. "No," she purred, tail swaying. "All those places can be reached by prying paws or greedy noses. We need a place no one dares disturb." Her eyes gleamed. The church," the mouse squeaked, shocked. "Think about it," the cat said. "Silent walls, watchful saints, and not a soul would dare take it. We'll tuck it beneath the altar itself. We'll be safe until the day we truly need it." And so, one quiet evening, they carried the pot together, the mouse struggling with her share. The cat moving with surprising care into the dim, echoing church. Beneath the altar, they placed it, cool and hidden. As they left, the cat's eyes lingered on it for a moment longer than the mouse noticed, and deep in her belly, a hunger stirred that had nothing to do with winter. The weeks rolled by in a quiet rhythm. The mouse was content, darting through the rafters to gather crumbs, drying seeds on the windowsill, and patching their little nest with bits of cloth she found. The cat, however, seemed to spend more time lounging in patches of sunlight, her green eyes half-lidded, her mind somewhere far away. One crisp morning, as the autumn wind rattled the shutters, the cat stretched lazily and said, "Dear sister, I must ask you for a favor." The mouse looked up from sorting acorns. "A favor?" "Yes," the cat replied, lowering her voice to something soft and serious. "It's a matter of family. My cousin, a very respectable cat, has made me the godmother of her newborn kitten. The christening is today." The mouse's whiskers twitched. "Godmother? That sounds important." "Oh, it is," the cat said with solemn gravity. "So one cannot refuse such an honor. It's tradition. I'll need to attend, of course. There will be vows, blessings, perhaps even a small feast afterward. But I will return before nightfall." 8. Mouse, though slightly disappointed to lose her companion for the day, nodded. "Go then. It's a good thing you're helping family. To keep our home tidy until you're back." The cat purred her thanks, but inside her chest, her heart beat faster for a different reason entirely. The christening was nothing more than an invention, a perfect excuse. She slipped out the door and padded quickly through back alleys until the church came into view, its tall spire cutting into the pale morning sky. Inside, The air was cool and still. She moved silently toward the altar, her paws making no sound on the stone floor. The clay pot sat exactly where they had left it. Her stomach tightened at the sight of the pale fat inside. She dipped her tongue in, just once at first, savoring the smooth, rich taste. But one lick became two, then three. Before she knew it, she had eaten away the top layer entirely, leaving the surface looking deceptively neat. She sat back, licking her whiskers clean, a sly satisfaction curling through her. No one would know, not yet. When she returned home that evening, the mouse asked politely, "And how was the christening?" "Lovely," the cat said with an angelic smile. The kitten was named Top-Off, an odd name, the mouse murmured, puzzled. But she didn't press the matter. The cat, meanwhile, curled up in her bed, the taste of stolen fat still warm on her tongue. Winter had begun to press its cold fingers through the cracks in their little house. The wind rattled the shutters more often now, and frost crept across the edges of the glass in delicate, silvery patterns. The mouse kept herself busy, sewing together scraps of fabric to line their nest, and counting the days until the clay pot in the church would be brought home for a proper feast. One afternoon, the cat sat near the hearth, staring into the flickering flames. She looked as though she were thinking deeply, too deeply for comfort. "Something troubling you?" the mouse asked, setting down a tiny bundle of dried berries. The cat sighed heavily, as though the weight of the entire world sat on her back. "My dear, I'm afraid I must leave again," she said, her voice solemn. The mouse blinked in surprise. "So soon? Where to?" "This time, it is another christening," the cat replied, glancing away as though embarrassed. "You see, my dearest friend, a noble cat who once saved my life, has asked me to stand as godmother to her kitten. I could not possibly refuse. Such things are sacred duties among our kind." The mouse, though slightly puzzled that so many kittens seemed to be arriving at once, nodded politely. "Of course, family and friends come first, but be safe. The wind is fierce today." The cat's lips curved into a faint smile. "Don't worry, I'll return before dark." But once outside, she moved quickly, tail low and ears flat against the cold. The air bit at her whiskers, but anticipation kept her paws warm. By the time she reached the church, her breath was a faint mist before her face. Inside, the stillness was the same as before. She padded to the altar with a kind of reverence, though it was not for the building or any blessing, but for the treasure she knew waited there. The pot seemed to greet her like an old friend. She lifted the lid, and the rich scent rose to meet her. This time, she did not even bother with caution. Her tongue swept deep into the fat, carving away a generous portion until she could see the bottom curve of the pot's side. It was almost too easy, too satisfying, and somewhere inside her, a small, dangerous thought began to grow. Perhaps I deserve it more than anyone else. When she returned home, the mouse was already lighting a candle against the early dusk. "How was the christening?" the mouse asked, passing her a cup of warm broth. The cat took a sip, then smiled faintly. "Quite touching," she said. The kitten was named Half Gone. The mouse tilted her head. "Another unusual name. Cats have their traditions." The cat replied smoothly, curling herself up in her bed, and as the fire cracked softly, she closed her eyes, hiding the faint glimmer of guilt, or perhaps satisfaction, behind her lashes. Days slipped by, and the frost deepened. The little house felt cozier than ever, with the fire's soft crackle filling the quiet and the scent of dried herbs drifting from the shelves. The mouse worked tirelessly, mending their blankets and sorting their winter stores, all the while keeping a mental count of the precious pot in the church. Yet, it was a whisper at the back of her mind. 2 christenings in such quick succession. 2 strange names, Top-Off and Half Gone. The mouse had never known the cat to have so many relatives, let alone ones giving their kittens such odd titles. One afternoon, while she was sweeping, The mouse paused, the broom still in her paws. She could hear the cat outside, speaking in a low voice to a passing sparrow. The wind carried only fragments of the words, "Cold season, plenty for me, and no need to share." The mouse's whiskers twitched. When the cat came in, her fur dusted with snow. The mouse decided to test the waters. "Funny, isn't it?" she said casually, "how each kitten's name seems to be about losing something." The cat's ears, FLICKED, double quotes. Well, you know cats, we valued the poetry in life. A name can mean many things, she replied with a soft laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. The mouse let the matter drop, though the thought stuck like a burr in her mind. Winter storms grew heavier that week, and one morning, as the mouse was sipping her tea, the cat stretched languidly and made her announcement. "I must go once more," she said. "Another kitten has come into the world, and I am again to be godmother. Such an honor, though it is tiring work in this weather." The mouse forced a smile. "I see. And what will this one be called, I wonder?" "That will be a surprise," the cat replied smoothly, though her tail curled and uncurled in a restless rhythm. And so, without further explanation, the cat slipped out into the cold. This time, the mouse went to the window and watched her until the figure disappeared down the road. She stood there for a long while, her breath fogging the glass, feeling the wind rattle the panes as though it were trying to warn her of something far away. In the silent church, the cat's paws touched the cold stone floor once again. The pot waited, lighter than before, and by the time she was done, it was nearly bare. Her whiskers twitched with a thrill she could not name, and as she left, she licked her lips, thinking only of herself. The snow that day came down in soft, endless veils, blanketing the village until the world looked like a silent dream. The mouse had set out extra kindling and made a small loaf of bread, thinking the cat would return quickly. But as the hours crept on, the shadows in the corners stretched, and the mouse began to feel that something far beyond the snow was keeping her companion away. She busied herself with chores, yet her mind was restless. 3 godchildren in one winter, she thought. Cats are not so devoted to ceremony, and each time she came back fuller in the belly, lighter in the eyes. The door creaked open just before dusk. The cat entered, her fur glittering with frost, her eyes bright in a way that wasn't entirely pleasant. "Well?" the mouse asked, trying to sound casual. "What's the name this time?" The cat sat by the fire, warming her paws before answering. "This one," she said with a purr, "is called All Gone." The mouse froze. "All gone?" "Yes," said the cat, stretching luxuriously. "A simple, honest name means there's nothing left." She gave a soft laugh, but it wasn't the laugh of a friend. It was the laugh of someone holding a private joke too close to their chest. The mouse's tail twitched. The pieces in her mind began to click together. The emptying pot, the strange names, the repeated trips. She tried to picture the pot in the church and could almost see the gleam of gold, fading, vanishing, until there was nothing at all. Still, she said nothing. Not yet, but she watched the cat more closely that evening. The way she avoided the mouse's eyes, the way she licked her lips slowly, still savoring something that had already been taken. Outside, the snow stopped falling, leaving the world hushed inside. The mouse's quiet suspicion solidified into certainty. Spring would come soon, and with it, the moment of truth. Winter loosened its grip slowly that year, as if reluctant to let the world wake again. First, the icicles began to shrink, dripping in tiny crystal tears. Then, the snow receded from the roads in narrow, muddy ribbons. The air smelled of wet earth and something faintly sweet, the promise of new things growing. The mouse had counted the days. She traced them on the wall with the point of a small stick, each mark carrying the weight of her quiet questions. 3 strange names. 3 secretive trips. Now, at last, the time had come to see the godchild in its resting place. We should go to the church, the mouse suggested one morning, her voice warm but careful. It's only right, after all this time. The cat was lying on the windowsill, eyes half shut in the weak spring sun. Her ears flicked lazily. To the church. What for? To see it, the mouse said. The pot, the godchild, it's tradition. She smiled gently, hiding her quickened heartbeat. The cat hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second, and in that sliver of silence, the mouse heard everything she needed to know. But the cat finally stretched and yawned, saying, "Very well, let's go then." The path to the church was still soft from the melting snow. The mouse walked briskly, her small feet pressing neat prints into the mud. The cat padded alongside her in silence, tail swaying low. When they arrived, the church stood quiet and still, its wooden walls damp from winter's touch. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of beeswax and dust. The mouse hurried to the altar. Her heart thudded as her eyes darted to the place where the pot had been kept. It was there, but the lid sat crooked. And when she stepped closer, her breath caught. The pot was empty. Not a single golden drop of fat remained. Her ears rang into silence. She turned slowly toward the cat. The cat was sitting back on her haunches, tail curling neatly around her paws, eyes half-lidded in satisfaction. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look surprised. She simply looked content. The mouse's small hands tightened into fists. The truth was no longer hidden in strange names or sidelong glances. It was staring her in the face. The godchilds had been eaten long ago. The walk back from the church was not like the walk there. The road seemed longer, the sky heavier. The early spring wind carried the faint scent of thawing soil. But neither the cat nor the mouse spoke to notice it. The mouse kept her eyes on the ground, her mind racing, every footstep pressing the truth deeper into her thoughts. The cat walked at a leisurely pace, as if the empty pot had been nothing more than an afterthought, a small inconvenience in a world full of bigger matters. Her paws didn't leave deep prints in the mud. She moved too lightly, almost like someone carrying no burden at all. Asterisk, when they reached the bend in the road, the mouse finally spoke. "You didn't seem surprised," she said, quietly. "Surprised?" Ted, the cat, tilted her head, as if the question itself was curious. "Why would I be?" "Well," the mouse replied, forcing her voice to remain even, "one would expect the godchild to still be there if it had been left untouched." The cat's whiskers twitched ever so slightly, not in amusement, but in something harder to read. "Perhaps someone else found it," she said. "The church is open, after all." The mouse gave a thin, humorless smile. "Yes, perhaps someone else, with very particular tastes." They walked on in silence again. The houses of the village began to appear in the distance, small, smoke-threaded silhouettes against the pale sky. The cat's eyes stayed fixed ahead, never meeting the mouse's gaze. Inside the mouse's mind, the thoughts turned over and over, sharp as broken glass. She thought of each name the cat had given: lick bowl, half gone, all gone, and how they had felt like riddles at the time, strange but harmless. Now they sounded like a confession, whispered in code by the time they reached the little cottage. The mouse knew two things. First, the fat was gone because the cat had eaten it. Second, pretending otherwise was no longer an option. The cat leaped lightly onto the windowsill, curling her tail around her paws. The mouse set her small basket down on the table and turned toward her. "We should talk," she said. The cat's green eyes met hers at last, calm, deep, and unreadable. "Then talk," she replied, and the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first crack in the wall between them. The mouse had never been one for direct confrontation. In her world, survival depended on knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. But now, the silence felt poisonous. The cat lounged on the windowsill as though she were carved there, tail curling and uncurling in a slow, hypnotic rhythm, her eyes half closed. She looked as though the mouse's words were a passing breeze, something she could enjoy or ignore at will. "You ate it," the mouse said, no ceremony, no build-up, just the plain truth dropped like a stone between them. The cat's ears flicked, but she didn't move. "And if I did?" she said, her voice smooth as warm cream. The mouse felt heat rise to her face. "It was ours, we agreed, for winter, for when food would be scarce." The cat gave a little shrug, as if the matter was far smaller than the mouse imagined. "Winter came," she said simply. "I was hungry." "You could have told me," the mouse snapped. Her small voice carried more force than she expected. "We could have shared. We could have planned." The cat finally lifted her head, her gaze sharpening, like a knife catching the light. "Shared," she repeated. "Planned. Little one, do you think hunger waits for meetings and votes?" The words landed heavy, and the mouse realized she had taken a step back without meaning to. There was something in the cat's tone, not just mockery, but an edge of warning. Still, she refused to retreat entirely. "We can't trust each other? What's the point of keeping any store for the future?" Asterisk, the cat leapt down from the sill in a fluid motion, landing so close that the mouse felt the faint warmth of her breath. "Perhaps," the cat said softly, "the lesson is not to leave the keeping to others." For a long moment, neither moved. The air felt thick, the way it does before a storm breaks. Then the cat turned away, curling up in the corner with a languid grace that looked almost theatrical. "You make too much of a small thing," she murmured. "Rest, little mouse. Tomorrow will be better." But the mouse knew, and perhaps the cat did too, that tomorrow would only bring sharper questions. The mouse did not sleep that night. She lay in her narrow bed of woven straw, staring into the dim beams above, hearing the faint creak of wood as the cat padded through the house. Every sound felt louder than it should have. The sigh of the wind, the tap of a loose shutter, the almost imperceptible scrape of claws on the floorboards. Her mind kept replaying the cat's words, not the ones about hunger. Those were simple enough to understand, but the last thing she had said before curling up, perhaps the lesson, is not to leave the keeping to others. The more the mouse thought about it, the more she realized the cat hadn't just been defending herself. She had been warning her by dawn. The mouse had decided, if the cat could not be trusted, then the only choice was to stop her before the next winter hunger came. But to do that, she would have to be clever, cleverer than the cat believed her to be. The mouse began her preparations quietly, while the cat lazed in the sunroom. She carried bits of string, tiny splinters of wood, and a bent nail back to her corner of the pantry. The nail she hammered oh so softly into a small beam with a pebble she used for cracking nuts. The strings she tied, one loop to another, until they formed a thin snare. By evening, she had the beginnings of a trap. Nothing that could harm the cat, but enough to make her think twice about prowling near the stores. Her plan was simple. If the cat tried to slip in during the night, she would find herself tangled, noisy, and exposed. And the mouse would be there, waiting to see the truth for herself. That night, the mouse pretended to sleep. The cat pretended to, stretched out in the corner, tail still, eyes closed. But the mouse could hear the breathing change, slow and patient, as the hours wore on. Then, just past midnight, the faintest whisper of movement, a paw on the floor, a tail brushing the wall. The mouse's heart hammered in her chest. The cat was coming. The pantry was silent, yet every nerve in the mouse's body screamed that something was wrong. she could hear the old wood groan faintly, as if the house itself knew what was about to happen. The cat's steps were nearly soundless. Only the faintest brush of fur against the doorframe betrayed her approach. The mouse stayed still, her whiskers barely twitching, eyes fixed on the snare she had set. But the cat didn't go toward the bait. She didn't even glance at the string tied low near the sacks of grain. Instead, she stopped at the very edge of the light, tail wrapped neatly around her paws, and just watched. A slow smile curled across her face. "Oh, little one," she murmured, her voice soft, almost kind. "Do you think I don't know?" The mouse's stomach turned cold. The trap hadn't been triggered, 'cause the cat had seen it from the start. You hide in the day and whisper to yourself at night. The cat continued, taking one deliberate step closer. You carry scraps, piece by piece, thinking I won't notice. But I notice everything. The mouse tried to keep her voice steady. "If you notice everything, then you know why I did it." "Oh, I know," the cat purred, lowering her head until her eyes gleamed like molten gold. "You think you can keep me out. But the truth, little mouse, is that I've been letting you live here, letting you store your food, letting you believe you're clever." The mouse's paws clenched around the edge of the straw bed. This wasn't a hunt. This was a game. One the cat had been playing far longer than she'd admitted. Then, without warning, the cat rose and turned away, padding toward the door. "Sleep well," she said lightly, tail swaying. "Tomorrow will be interesting." The mouse sat frozen long after the cat was gone, staring at the useless snare. It wasn't just about guarding the food anymore. Something far bigger, far more dangerous, was coming. Morning came, like a thief, creeping in before the mouse was ready. She woke to the faint vibration of footsteps above, the sound of furniture being dragged, an unfamiliar hum that didn't belong to the old house. The cat was moving differently today. There was no lazy stroll, no idle patrolling of the kitchen. Her steps were measured, deliberate, and the soft scrape of her claws against the floorboards made Kata, the mouse's fur, prickle. The mouse peeked from her crack in the wall. The cat sat in the center of the pantry, not watching the grain sacks this time, but the door, and beside her was something new, a shallow ceramic bowl filled with milk, placed right in the open. It was bait, obvious, blatant bait. "You've been making the rules for too long," the cat called softly, a voice curling like smoke. "Today, we play my way." The mouse's heart pounded. This wasn't just about hunger now. It was a challenge, and if she ignored it, the cat might grow bolder. But if she accepted, she might never make it back to her wall. She remembered the words from last night. "I've been letting you live here." The truth burned bitter in her chest. The cat had power because she believed. The mouse would play by her terms. Not today. The mouse scurried to the opposite side of the pantry, using the gaps in the baseboards as cover. If she could tip the bowl from behind without being seen, the milk would spill under the shelves, forcing the cat to move and giving her an opening. Her paws reached the base of the bowl when the cat's shadow fell over her. "Too slow," the cat whispered, striking like lightning. But instead of teeth was a clang. A small tin lid, planted by the mouse days ago, slid under the cat's paw at the last second, sending her off-balance dot. The mouse darted for the wall. Hearing the frustrated hiss behind her, she didn't stop until she was safe inside the darkness, her breath sharp in her chest. The rules had changed, but not in the way the cat expected. The mouse didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the old beams above was cataloged in her mind. She knew where the cat stepped most often, where her claws clicked, and where her weight made the wood dip ever so slightly by morning. She had a plan, not just to survive, to interrupt when the cat emerged for her usual patrol. The pantry smelled faintly of sunflower seeds, and irresistible. Sent to a hungry predator who occasionally enjoyed variety, the mouse had placed them along the far wall, each one nestled in a thin dusting of flour. It wasn't bait, it was misdirection. The cat padded over, its twitching pupils narrowing to slits, the flour puffed up under her paws, sticking lightly to the fur between her toes. She barely noticed until she stepped into the kitchen, and her own tracks glared back at her from the dark wood floor. The mouse had been waiting for that moment. From her hiding place under the bread shelf, she let out a sharp, deliberate scratch, a sound the cat could never resist. The predator turned sharply, following the prints back into the pantry, but the mouse was already gone, slipping into the narrow gap behind the water barrel. The cat's tail lashed, irritated, and for the first time, she hesitated, because this wasn't just a chase anymore. Someone was moving pieces against her. The mouse pressed her cheek to the cool wall, heart steadying. The balance of power had shifted, not completely, but enough to make the cat doubt herself. And doubt, the mouse knew, could be deadlier than any trap. The morning passed in uneasy quiet. The cat did not prowl the hallway. She did not patrol the pantry. She didn't even lounge in her usual sunny spot by the window. Asterisk for a prey animal, silence could mean safety. But the mouse knew better. Silence could also mean the predator had changed the rules. She ventured only inches from her den, whiskers trembling, sniffing the air. The house smelled the same old wood, distant traces of bread, the faint metallic temps of the stove. But there was an absence in the rhythm of sound. No soft thud of paws, no impatient tail tapping, no claws flexing against the floorboards. The mouse crept to the pantry, case doorframe, and froze. It was open to open. She scanned the shadows, expecting the familiar gleam of green eyes. Nothing, not even the twitch of an ear. The mouse remembered something her grandmother had once said. Back in the nest, hidden under the shed, the most dangerous cat is the one you cannot hear, because she is already closer than you think. A faint change in the air reached her, not sound, but the way her tiny fur shifted along her spine. It was coming from above, her head tilted upward, slow as a clock's minute hand. There, on the pantry shelf, between sacks of flour, the cat crouched like a carved statue. Her body was so still that dust motes floated past, her whiskers without disturbance. Only her eyes moved, tracking the mouse with a patient, deliberate hunger. The mouse didn't bolt, not yet. Bolting meant surrendering the rhythm. Instead, she backed away, one careful step at a time, never breaking eye contact. Asterisk, the cat didn't pounce. That was worse than if she had, because it meant she was playing something longer, a hunt stretched into hours, maybe days. The mouse retreated to her hole, but her mind was already working. The cat had shown her patience. Now she would have to show the cat something rarer still, the will to wait even longer. And in that waiting, she would prepare. Night draped the house in quiet, not the kind of quiet that feels safe, the kind that presses against the skin, thick and watchful. The mouse sat inside her den, curled in the smallest ball her body could manage, ears tuned to every creak and sigh of the old wooden walls. Somewhere out there, the cat waited. The stillness between them had become its own language. They were speaking without words, each testing the other's patience, each refusing to make the first fatal move. The mouse imagined the cat's position, not in the pantry now. This would have moved. Not in the kitchen either. That was too obvious. No, the cat would choose somewhere in between. She could see the mouse's approach without being seen herself. And so the mouse waited. Minutes stretched into hours. The air inside the den grew stale, warm with her own breath. Her muscles ached from being curled so tight. But she did not move. Not until she heard it. A single exhale soft, drawn out like a sigh, escaping someone trying not to be heard. The cat, it came from the base of the hallway, near the shadow of the coat rack. The mouse's mind mapped the distance, the angles, the possible escape routes. Every instinct told her to stay hidden, but something colder, sharper, whispered another plan. Draw her in. Make her think she's already won. The mouse shuffled, just enough to send a faint rustle out into the open air. It was the sound of a creature too careless, too hungry to notice danger. The hallway seemed to lean forward. The shadow beneath the coat rack thickened. Two green pinpoints plumed like lanterns in the dark. The mouse's heartbeat thundered in her chest, but she held still. Feigning ignorance, she knew the cat's rule. The pounce only comes when the prey moves, so she would not move. Not yet. The cat crept forward, body low, shoulders rising and falling with each silent step. The mouse felt the vibration of each paw against the wooden floor. 5 steps away, 4.3. And then a loud crash from the kitchen, a glass jar falling, shattering against the stone tiles. The cat froze mid-step, ears swiveling. The mouse didn't waste a heartbeat. She darted into the darkness of the opposite wall, vanishing into a hairline crack she had been widening for days. The hunt had been broken, but not ended. The mouse curled deeper into her new hiding place, a small, defiant smile flickering in the dark. The cat had been seconds away from the kill dot. Now, the waiting game would begin all over again. The crash in the kitchen had not been an accident. The mouse knew that now. When she slipped into a narrow crack between the walls, she could hear the soft patter of claws retreating, not toward the pantry, but deeper, toward the cellar door. That was the cat's instinct, control the lower ground, force the prey upward. But the mouse had spent her life learning these walls. The cat was only borrowing them inside the hidden space. The mouse scurried along the wooden beams, her paws tracing familiar routes. Here, a panel warped just enough to peer into the hallway. There, a section of plaster crumbled easily under pressure. Every weakness in the house was a doorway, not for her escape, but for her revenge. She stopped above the coat rack, where the cat had crouched moments earlier. From this vantage point, she could see the top of the cat's head as she scanned the hallway, tail flicking in slow, calculated arcs. The mouse plucked a tiny shard of plaster from the wall and let it slip. It struck the floor with a dry tick. The cat's head whipped upward, exactly as planned. In that instant of distraction, the mouse darted to her next position. Unseen, she reached the kitchen ceiling beams, where dust gathered in thick layers. One nudge, and it rained down in a fine, choking cloud. Below, the cat hissed, shaking her fur free. Not dangerous, but irritating. And irritation had a way of making predators sloppy. The mouse's mind spun faster now. She knew where the loose nails were. The floorboards ground the loudest, where the pipes dripped in irregular beats that could mask her movements. The house wasn't just shelter anymore. It was a weapon from within the walls. She could make it speak. Creaks here, thuds there, shadows shifting just out of sight. Each sound would pull the cat in the wrong direction. Each false trail would keep her hunting in circles. And in circles, hunters burned energy. Tired hunters made mistakes. Somewhere below, the cat prowled toward the pantry again, ears twitching at every noise. She didn't know she was following a script. The mouse had already written. The mouse crouched in the darkness, steadying her breath. She could wait as long as it took. Tonight, the hunt no longer belonged to the cat. The cellar door groaned as the cat nudged it open with her head. The air that rose from below was cool, metallic, a scent of stone and dust that carried the faintest trace of something living. Her whiskers twitched. She descended slowly, each paw landing with the silence of a shadow. The cellar was her kind of place. No windows, no wind, only the damp stillness where sound traveled like a whisper through bone. Down here, she could hear everything, the faint scuttle of beetles in the wall, the slow drip of water into a rusted tin pail. But the mouse was not where she should have been. The cat padded forward, tail held low, eyes adjusting to the dark. A beam of moonlight cut through a narrow, ground-level window, striping the stone floor in silver. For a moment, she caught a movement in that light. Small, darting, she lunged. Her claws met emptiness. Somewhere above, a soft tap, tap, tap echoed, irregular, like water hitting wood. But the cat's ears told her it was not water. It was deliberate. She turned, scanning the cellar walls, and then she noticed something strange. A section of the wall, near the old shelving unit, wasn't flushed at. It bulged ever so slightly outward, just enough for a small gap to show. Behind that gap, the tapping continued, maddeningly faint. The cat approached. That's when the air shifted. Not the sound of movement, the feel of it. A slow, steady current of cool air brushing her fur, as though the cellar itself was breathing. It seemed to come from the wall. She reached the gap, lowered her head, and sniffed. The scent was the mouse's sharp, warm, threaded with the unmistakable edge of adrenaline. The prey was close, too close. She inserted a paw into the gap, claws extended, and felt something brush against them. The mouse bolted inside the wall, but instead of fleeing upward, she ran in a tight circle, skittering along beams and joists that groaned under her weight. The sound ricocheted strangely, bouncing in ways the cat had never heard before. It was disorienting. The cat pressed further in, her head now against the opening. Her claws scraped wood. Then, suddenly, the beam above her shifted. A small rain of sawdust and grit poured down, clues stinging her eyes. She hissed, stumbling back above. The tapping stopped. The breathing air stilled. The cellar felt heavier now, the silence pressing in like wet cloth. The cat realized, slowly, comfortably, that she was no longer hunting in her own way. The mouse was guiding her steps. Every noise, every scent, every shadow had been placed exactly where it would pull her next. The realization sank like ice into her spine. Still, pride forced her forward. She would flush the little creature out tonight, or not at all, but in the darkness of the cellar. Her ears caught the faintest sound of movement. Above, the mouse was already gone. And worse, the cat knew that meant she had left the cellar exactly when the mouse wanted her to. The cat emerged from the cellar, her whiskers still dusted with grit. The narrow hallway ahead was quiet. Too quiet. The house seemed to be holding its breath. The wood beneath her paws was warm, almost unnaturally so, as though the floorboards had been soaking up sunlight that no longer existed. The shadows in the corners were thick and uneven, pooling strangely along the walls. Her ears flicked left, then right. No movement, no sound. Yet the fur along her spine prickled. Asterisk, the mouse was here, somewhere. She began forward, slowly, paw after careful paw, her head low and tail parallel to the floor. Halfway down the hall, she paused. There it was again, that subtle current of air, brushing past her cheek, not from behind, not from ahead, from above. Her eyes darted upward. The ceiling was lined with old beams, and between them, small, square vents punctuated the plaster. From one of those vents came a faint sound, not quite a squeak, not quite a breath. It was the sound of something listening. She crept toward the wall, eyes fixed on the vent. Her tail twitched with the precision of a drawn bowstring. She was ready to leap, claws first, when something shifted in her peripheral vision at the far end of the hallway. The shadow near the baseboard, another vent cover quivered. Just once, barely, enough to see, but she saw it. Asterisk, she froze. 2 vents, 2 points of sound. 2 mice? No, that wasn't right. The The scent on the air was still the same. One mouse, one heartbeat, but moving so quickly, so unpredictably. It was as though she was everywhere at once. Asterisk, the cat's ears swiveled furiously, catching tiny bursts of sound from each end of the hall. A scrape here, a faint tap there. The rhythm was erratic, impossible to track. It made her feel off balance, her hunter's instincts misfiring with every pulse of noise. Asterisk, and then the flicker. Not from the vents, but from the walls themselves. Tiny holes, almost too small to notice, caught the light and reflected it back in brief. Silver flashes like glints of eyes. Dozens of them. Watching her asterisk, she backed up a step, her tail puffing despite her best effort to keep it sleek. The sensation was wrong now. The hallway didn't feel like a place to hunt. It felt like a narrow cage, and she was standing in the center while something mapped her every move. A noise echoed suddenly, a high-pitched tink, and her head snapped toward the sound, but it was already gone. Only the hallway remained, empty and silent. Then, from directly behind her, right by her hind leg, came a whisper of movement. So close, she could feel the heat of it. She spun, swiping at the air, claws raking the floorboards. Nothing. The vents were silent. The glints in the walls had vanished, and the mouse was gone. The cat realized she had walked the entire length of the hallway without meaning to, right to the last door, the one she rarely entered. And as she stared at the thin crack beneath it, she saw the tiniest wisp of dust curl outward, as if something had just slipped inside. The cat pressed her nose to the crack beneath the door. The air seeping through was cooler than the hallway, but it carried a density, a stillness that made her pause. No sound, no scent strong enough to confirm the mouse was inside. Only the faint, metallic temps of something that didn't belong to this house. She nudged the door with her shoulder. It gave a reluctant groan, swinging inward on stiff hinges. The room beyond was small, square, most perfectly so, with bare wooden walls and a single window at the far side. Pale daylight spilled through the glass, but the light seemed muted, almost strained, as though the outside world was further away than it should be. She stepped inside, tail low, every muscle coiled. The door eased shut behind her with a dull click. She didn't look back, not yet. The floor was oddly clean. No dust, no debris, no spider webs in the corners. But as she padded forward, her paws met faint grooves carved into the wood, narrow, curving lines that formed shapes she didn't recognize. They felt too deliberate to be scratches from its furniture. They were almost like writing. Her ears flicked toward the window. It stood closed, but the curtain beside it stirred slightly, as if touched by a breeze from somewhere inside the room. And then she noticed it. The sound she hadn't realized she was hearing until it stopped. A soft, repetitive tapping. Not random, not natural. It had been there since she entered, blended into the quiet like a second heartbeat. Now it was gone. In the absence made her skin crawl. The cat's eyes narrowed. This was no normal space. It wasn't a hiding place for prey. It was arranged. Every wall, every shadow seemed angled toward the center of the room, toward her. She turned to glance. At the door, it was shut tight. The latch, which he hadn't touched, was now locked. Oh, its faint shift in the floor made her spin back. Near the far corner, where two grooves intersected, tiny panel had slid open, no wider than her paw. From within came the scent, the mouse dot. Her pupils widened, her muscles tightening for the strike. But just as she tensed to pounce, the panel slammed shut with a hollow thunk. Almost instantly, another panel opened on the opposite wall, then another, high above her head, then two more, near the baseboard end. Seconds, the room was alive with moving parts, hidden slits sliding open and closed in rapid, unpredictable patterns. From some faint flashes of movement, darted just out of sight. From others, came that subtle current of air, as if something inside was breathing. She lashed her tail, trying to track the mouse's scent as it flitted between openings. But it was impossible. The room was too fast, too coordinated. Every time she turned toward one panel, another opened behind her. It was a game, a cruel one. She tried the door. It didn't budge. The latch rattled once, like a laugh. The tapping sound returned, louder now, coming from all sides. It grew into a rhythm. 3 short taps, 1 long. 3 short taps, 1 long. Over and over, echoing through the hidden spaces in the walls. Her ears twitched wildly. Unable to focus, she felt the heat of her own breath, quick and sharp. The mouse wasn't just evading her, it was controlling her, leading her in circles, pulling her attention where it wanted. The curtain near the window stirred again. Only this time, the movement didn't stop. It swelled outward, as though something behind it was pushing forward. She crouched low, claws sliding out. Whatever stepped from behind that fabric would meet her teeth before it could make a sound. But when the curtain finally shifted aside, there was no mouse, only a hole in the wall. Small, circular, impossibly dark. From its depths came the faintest glint, like a single watching eye. The tapping stopped, and the silence that followed was worse than the noise. The sea had been whispering warnings all day. Low, uneasy sighs rolled in from the horizon, and the wind carried a scent of salt, sharper than usual, like a blade dipped in brine. The fisherman stood on the edge of the shore, the line in his hand, trembling not from weakness, but from the restless pull of the waves. By evening, the sky had turned the color of bruised steel. The gulls that usually circled lazily above had vanished inland, and the wife, peering out from their small, weather-worn home, felt her stomach knot. She had lived long enough by the sea to know that when birds fled and silence followed, a storm was not far behind. But there was something different in the air tonight. The wind did not roar. It whispered, almost calling his name. The fisherman, against all common sense, felt a strange pull to stay. His wife, uneasy, begged him to come inside, yet he simply smiled faintly and told her, some gifts are only found in the heart of danger. As darkness fell, the storm arrived, not with a crash, but with a slow, deliberate force, as though the sky itself leaned closer to watch. The waves rose like living creatures, curling and hissing, while lightning stitched jagged silver lines across the clouds. The fisherman braced himself, clutching his net, and suddenly the water before him split. From that churning chaos emerged something no man could expect, a small, glowing figure, like a child woven from moonlight and foam. It floated toward him, untouched by the rain, its voice carrying through the storm as if the wind itself obeyed it. I am the tide's messenger, it said, eyes deep as the ocean floor. You have given to the sea without greed, taken only what you needed. Tonight, the sea gives back. Before he could speak, the figure placed something in his weathered palm, a single pearl, warm against his skin, glowing faintly in the stormlight. He knew instinctively that this was no ordinary pearl. It pulsed like a heartbeat, carrying a strange comfort that seemed to seep into his bones. The next moment, the figure dissolved into the water, and the waves gentled, retreating like obedient hounds. The storm broke apart, leaving only the fisherman, the pearl, and the sky slowly mending itself with stars. When he returned home, Hay's wife touched the pearl and gasped softly, for in that instant, every worry she carried seemed to lift, replaced by a calm she hadn't felt in years. They did not sell it, nor display it. It stayed on a small wooden shelf by their bed, a quiet reminder that sometimes the sea's greatest treasures are not caught in nets, but given freely in moments of trust. And from that night on, whenever the waves whispered, the fisherman listened, for he knew the ocean had a voice. And once it had chosen to speak to him, the pearl remained on the little wooden shelf, for many weeks. A quiet, glowing secret that belonged only to them. At night, when the wind swept in from the shore, it would catch the faintest shimmer, like moonlight remembering the sea dot. At first, they thought it was only a trick of the eyes. But one night, when the fisherman lay awake listening to the slow, deep breath of the tide, he noticed the pearl was pulsing again, faint, steady, almost like a heartbeat. He rose quietly so as not to wake his wife and took it into his palm. The warmth it carried was the same as the night the sea had given it to him, but now there was something else. A rhythm, a calling. He stepped outside into the salt, heavy air. The moon hung low, a pale lantern guiding him toward the waves. He followed without question, feet sinking into the cool sand. The shore was nearly silent. No gulls, no wind, only the sound of water curling over itself. The moment he reached the edge where the foam kissed his toes, the pearl grew warmer. Then he heard it, a voice, not loud but clear, coming from everywhere at once. The sea remembers. Before he could speak, the water drew back in a great, sweeping breath, revealing stones he had never seen before, smooth, dark, and glistening as if freshly polished. Between them lay a narrow path leading into the ocean itself, illuminated by pale blue light that seemed to come from nowhere. He hesitated only for a heartbeat. Then, tightening his grip on the pearl, he stepped forward. The deeper he went, the lighter his body felt, until the water was up to his chest. Yet, he could still breathe as if he were walking through air. Fish with silver fins swam beside him, unafraid, their scales flashing like scattered stars. Strange corals reached upward like frozen flames, and the water grew warmer the farther he walked. Finally, the path opened into a vast underwater clearing where a great shape waited. It was a whale, larger than any ship he had ever seen, its skin marked with the lines of ages, eyes deep as the abyss. The creature lowered its head until its gaze met his, and he understood without words. This was the keeper of the deep, the oldest witness of the ocean's memory. The whale opened its mouth, not to devour, but to speak, though the voice came from inside his mind. Asterisk, you have taken only what you need and given more than you've claimed. Right. The sea does not forget kindness. The pearl you hold carries more than beauty. It carries a bond. Should you ever be lost, the depths will guide you home. The whale then sang a sound, so deep and low, it seemed to vibrate in the bones of the world. The song was not just music, but a map, a memory, and a promise all at once. When the fisherman finally turned back, the path of glowing stones led him to the shore again. He stepped out, dripping but strangely dry, and looked down to see the pearl no longer pulsed faintly. It now glowed steady and strong, as though it had truly awakened. That night, lying beside his wife, he told her only part of the truth. Some things, he knew, were not meant to be spoken too soon. But he slept with the pearl beneath his pillow, knowing that somewhere in the depths, the sea was watching and waiting. The following days passed quietly, almost too quietly. The fisherman went about his work, as always, casting nets, mending lines, and selling his catch in the village. But no matter how bright the sun or how calm the water, there was a strange weight in the air, like the sea was holding its breath. His wife noticed it too. Sometimes, when she stood at the window, she swore the horizon seemed closer than it should be, as though the ocean were inching forward in small, invisible steps. One evening, the sky turned the color of bruised steel. The wind, though soft, carried a strange scent, not salt, not rain, but something older, almost metallic. The fisherman sat sharpening his knife when a low hum rolled across the beach. He knew that sound. The pearl, resting in the wooden bowl by the hearth, had begun to glow again, brighter than ever before, each pulse sending ripples through the air. Without thinking, he took it in his hand, and the hum became a voice. The bond is made. The tide will speak. The fisherman stepped outside and found the sea standing unnaturally still, as if every wave had been caught mid-motion. Then the water parted, not in a wild crash, but in a slow, deliberate opening, revealing a corridor of swirling light. From within emerged a figure, tall, cloaked in strands of seaweed and dripping pearls that clicked softly against one another. Their face was shadowed, but their eyes glowed with the same blue light as the pearl. "You hold what belongs to the depths," the figure said, voice neither male nor female, but something between. "The ocean is not without generosity, but it is never without price." The fisherman's fingers tightened around the pearl. "What do you want of me?" The figure stepped closer. "Life for a life. The sea gave you safe passage in storms, filled your nets when the waters were lean, and placed in your hands a treasure men would kill for. In return, the depths will call for one soul. Not now, but when the tide decides." A cold shiver passed through him. "And if I refuse?" The figure tilted their head, and the shore behind them seemed to blur. Villagers, houses, even the cliffs began to fade like a watercolor, washed with too much water. "Refuse, and the sea will take more than a soul. It will take all." The fisherman's breath caught. His mind raced. There had to be another way. "It must be done," he said, finally. "Let it be me when the time comes." The figure steadied him for a long, quiet moment, the sound of the suspended waves filling the silence. Finally, they nodded. "Brave, foolish, but the sea honors its bargains." They raised one hand, and the pearl in his palm grew so hot he nearly dropped it. When he looked again, its smooth surface now carried a single thin crack, as if marking the start of a countdown. Only the tide could read. The figure turned back toward the open water, and as they stepped into it, the sea closed in behind them. The waves began to move again, the wind returned, and the night sounds of the shore filled the air as though nothing had happened. Only the fisherman knew better. That night, told his wife, nothing but sleep did not come easily. He could still hear the figure's voice in his head. Not now, but when the tide decides. The following days passed quietly, almost too quietly. The fisherman went about his work, as always, casting nets, mending lines, and selling his catch in the village. But no matter how bright the sun or how calm the water, there was a strange weight in the air, like the sea was holding its breath. His wife noticed it too. Sometimes, when she stood at the window, she swore the horizon seemed closer than it should be, as though the ocean were inching forward in small, invisible steps. One evening, the sky turned the color of bruised steel. The wind, though soft, carried a strange scent. Not salt, not rain, but something older, almost metallic. The fisherman sat sharpening his knife when a low hum rolled across the beach. He knew that sound. The pearl, resting in the wooden bowl by the hearth, had begun to glow again, brighter than ever before, each pulse sending ripples through the air. Without thinking, he took it in his hand, and the hum became a voice. "The bond is made. The tide will speak." The fisherman stepped outside and found the sea standing unnaturally still, as if every wave had been caught mid-motion. Then the water parted, not in a wild crash, but in a slow, deliberate opening, revealing a corridor of swirling light. From within emerged a figure, tall, cloaked in strands of seaweed and dripping pearls that clicked softly against one another. Their face was shadowed, but their eyes glowed with the same blue light as the pearl. "You hold what belongs to the depths," the figure said, voice neither male nor female, but something between. "The ocean is not without generosity, but it is never without price." The fisherman's fingers tightened around the pearl. "What do you want of me?" The figure stepped closer. "Life for a life. The sea gave you safe passage in storms, filled your nets when the waters were lean, and placed in your hands a treasure men would kill for. In return, the depths will call for one soul. Not now, but when the tide decides. A cold shiver passed through him. And if I refuse? The figure tilted their head, and the shore behind them seemed to blur. Villagers, houses, even the cliffs began to fade like a watercolor, washed with too much water. Refuse, and the sea will take more than a soul. It will take all. The fisherman's breath caught. His mind raced. There had to be another way. It must be done. He said, finally, let it be me when the time comes. The figure studied him for a long, quiet moment, the sound of the suspended waves filling the silence. Finally, they nodded. Brave, foolish, but the sea honors its bargains. They raised one hand, and the pearl in his palm grew so hot he nearly dropped it. When he looked again, its smooth surface now carried a single thin crack, as if marking the start of a countdown. Only the tide could read. The figure turned back toward the open water, and as they stepped into it, the sea closed in behind them. The waves began to move again, the wind returned, and the night sounds of the shore filled the air as though nothing had happened. Only the fisherman knew better. That night, told his wife, nothing but sleep did not come easily. He could still hear the figure's voice in his head. Not now, but when the tide decides. Out on the water, the strangeness only deepened. His small boat drifted to Isley, as though the sea were carrying him rather than letting him row. The nets filled quickly, unnaturally quickly. Glinting silverfish practically leapt into them. Not one fish thrashed or struggled. They lay still, watching him with glassy eyes, their gills moving slowly as if aware of him. By midday, a mist began to creep over the water, swallowing the horizon. From somewhere deep below came a sound. Not a whale's call, not the groan of shifting ice, but something deeper. It was a note so low it seemed to vibrate in his bones. The same hum the pearl had made. He gripped the tiller and turned for shore, but the mist shifted with him, guiding him not home, but toward a section of the coast he had never visited. Black, jagged rocks rose like teeth from the water, each slick with seaweed that glistened as though it were breathing. And there, between two of those rocks, something moved. At first, he thought it was driftwood, but driftwood didn't have fingers. A pale hand broke the surface, its nails long and sharp as shells, its skin faintly luminous in the gloom. It didn't grasp at the air, but beckoned him forward. The fisherman's breath caught. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but his arms refused the command. Hairs dipped into the water of their own accord. When he was close enough, the figure emerged, not the same as the one from the tide's corridor, but smaller, thinner. Its hair tangled with strands of black kelp. Its eyes were so pale they seemed almost blind, but they locked onto him unerringly. "You've been marked," it whispered. The voice was quiet, but the mist carried it straight to his ears. "Tide remembers." "I know," the fisherman said, though his own voice felt strange in his throat. "It will test you before it takes you," the figure continued. "It will watch, always, to see if you waver. If you do," its lips curled in two, something between a smile and a grimace. "It will choose someone else in your place." The fisherman's stomach dropped. "Someone else? Who?" The figure tilted its head toward the shore, toward where his village. His wife, in every face he knew, would be going about their day, unaware. He tightened his grip on the oar. "Until, be me. I gave my word." The figure sank slowly back into the water, its pale hand slipping beneath the surface like a fading moonbeam. The mist rolled away as though nothing had been there at all. By the time he returned to shore, the sun was low, and his wife stood waiting at the edge of the dunes. Her face lit with relief when she saw him, but the fisherman could not bring himself to smile back that night. As he lay beside her, he stared at the crack in the pearl on the table. He thought of the voice in the mist. "It will test you before it takes you." He had a terrible feeling that testing had already begun. The first pale light of dawn crept across the sea, gilding the restless waves in silver and gold. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the air was still. The wind had quieted, the sea's roar softened to a gentle hush, and the fisherman stood alone on the shore, his feet sinking into the wet sand as the tide came in. He could feel if this was the end of the journey. The great circle of wishes and demands had run its course, and now only truth remained from the deep. The flounder rose once more, its shimmering body casting ripples that danced with the light. Its eyes, old as time itself, held no malice, only a weary understanding. "You have walked far, fisherman," the flounder said, its voice like the sigh of a distant wave. "You have seen greed and longing, love and loss, and now, what is it that you truly desire?" The fisherman hesitated. For so long, he had been pulled between the world's glittering promises and the quiet life he once knew. He thought of the hut, the smell of salt and wood smoke, the laughter that had once filled his days. He thought of Ilse Bilnat, the woman who had demanded kingdoms, but the young wife who once smiled at him by the shore, content with nothing more than his company. "I want only peace," he said at last, "and to return to where we began." The flounder's eyes softened. "So it shall be." Great wave rose, not angry, but vast and encompassing. It rolled toward him, warm and bright, swallowing the shore in a single sweep. When the water receded, the grand palace was gone. The marble steps, the gilded spires, the endless rooms vanished as though they had never been. In their place stood the old hut, weathered by years of wind and salt, its door hanging slightly ajar. Inside, Ilsebel sat by the small hearth, a simple pot of stew simmering over the fire. She looked up as he stepped inside, and for a moment, her eyes were soft, almost shy like they had been in the beginning. No words were needed. Outside, the tide continued its eternal rhythm, coming and going, whispering its stories to the sand. And though the fisherman knew that life would never be without storms, he also knew that they would face them together, not with crowns or castles, but with the quiet strength that had been there all along. And so, the sea kept its secrets, and the fisherman kept his peace.